So Reformation Day, here we are again. As Elizabeth said, 504 years and counting. It's a long span of time if you're American, maybe not quite so much if you're German, but still a long, long period of time. A lot of things have changed and a lot of things have stayed the same in many ways. I was mindful of the Senate Assembly, I think it was in 2017, or it might have been in 2016. I think it was in 2017. That was held in San Jose for our synod. And one of the ecumenical speakers bringing greetings was the bishop of the Roman Catholic Church of the Diocese of San Jose. And the fact that it was the Reformation year, everybody in the whole universe, particularly in church circles of any variety, knew that the 500th was coming. The Pope even knew, flew to Sweden to celebrate it. I don't think Luther could have imagined that. But the Bishop of San Jose got up in front to bring his greetings from our Catholic siblings to the Lutherans there gathered. They had offered for us to have our opening worship service in the cathedral there. I mean, that's huge. Logistics didn't allow for it, but it was an incredibly gracious gesture. And I remember the bishop getting up with this slight Irish accent, which just seemed quite appropriate. And as he was giving greetings, one of the things that he said is, "We knew there would be a lot of Lutherans in town. You'll note that the doors of the cathedral are bronze. You can't nail anything to them." Which I thought, that's a pretty good sport. I thought that was pretty good. But when we think of the wake and the shadow that is cast by the Reformation, and in Lutheran circles, on our best days, which is not all of them, but on our best days, we say, always reforming, always changing. But now, if we go back to Luther, there are a few things that I think are important. We know this Reformation phrase that we hear written from Paul in the readings that we have for today, that we are justified by grace as a free gift, not as a result of works of the law. We know that. We think of that as the Reformation message, and it is in many ways. This idea of freeing the gospel so that it might be expressed in its purity. Now, some of you may realize, if you were up early this morning and reading through your Lutheran confessional statements, that in many ways as Lutherans, that's how we define the church. Not because a church has the right bishop or pastor or anything like that, but we say it's where the sacraments are administered rightly and the gospel is preached in its purity. Now, when we talk about this issue of gospel and justification by grace, they're not exactly the same thing. And I'll get to that in a second, but I want to talk about justification first. In 2021, as we gather here at 3149 Waverly Street in Palo Alto, we may not have woken up and laid there in bed this morning going, I'm wondering if my sins are forgiven, if I'm in fact justified by grace, or if I need to be doing more works today. That is probably not our modern angst. But I want to broaden the way we think about things. A couple weeks ago, well, it was last weekend, I was not here. I was down in Thousand Oaks, or as we lovingly call it, TO, at California Lutheran University for homecoming. Now, a couple of days before we went down, I got an email from the university, because we had signed up saying, we'll be at the festival, we'd like tickets, that kind of thing. And they said, we'd like you to come for dinner at the president's house on Friday. And I was like, whoa. Why am I only getting the invitation now? I turned to Marielle and talked about it, and we thought, somebody must have canceled. That was our immediate assumption. There was a free couple of seats, and we would be invited. And we thought, sure, why not? We'll go. And so as we pulled up to the house, we parked the car, and I remember thinking to myself, there's going to be like real grown-ups at this party. How are we at this thing? I don't understand. There is this sense of, are we justified in even being there? What is my sense? What are my credentials? How do I justify myself? If I were to show up at the door and somebody particularly rudely in Lutheran circles would say, now, excuse me, why are you here? What's my justification for why I am there, right? How do I justify my place? We all justify ourselves every day. I'm a good neighbor. I'm a productive citizen. I deserve the position that I have at work. I did well on this test. We spend a lot of our waking moments justifying our position relative to those around us, and it is works, 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 and works. It is every moment of our lives spent justifying the fact that we take up space in this world. That may not be the heady theological language that we get from the Reformation, but I think even as modern day people, we know that drive to justify ourselves. No, we deserve to have our offer on that house accepted, etc., etc., etc. It is about works. There is a lot of works righteousness in our world. And if we think of it as the church, we might think, I'm not quite sure what that means. But when we think about all of the other things we do in this life to justify our space in the world, it doesn't take us too long to think about all of the things that we do on a regular basis, falling to bed exhausted. Now, if we think of justification, we also recognize those who know that they are free of justifying themselves. We often look at those folks as being a little strange, right? First off, the ones we don't think of as strange are toddlers. Toddlers don't lay awake at night wondering if they should be there or not. And isn't there a freedom and a joy in watching them interact? When we see it in an adult, do you notice how off-putting it is? Do you notice somebody who is just free in who they are and the space that they take up? It's disorienting because we all know there are works involved in getting where we are, right? Oftentimes, folks like that get a little socially ostracized because they're not playing by the works rules that all of us know are essential, right? So, justification. The other piece of this, though, is the gospel. I think on Reformation Sunday, we focus on this issue of justification by grace. But Luther was all about that as a consequence of the gospel being preached in its purity and not trapped in this business of church works and righteousness. This idea that the gospel stands on its own and brings that freedom to us. So, as Lutherans on Reformation Day, we remember that we are justified by grace through faith. We know that phrase. But as one of my colleagues this last week commented, I think it's key for us to remember that core gospel message that is behind all of it. And that message is, Christ is risen. Christ is risen today. That is the gospel. When we see people who are free in their own selves, who don't worry about justifying their space in the world or in that social setting or whatever the case is, they are no longer justifying their own lives. There is a freedom in that, an understanding that in the resurrection of Christ, death does not have the last word. So this life, then, is not lived entirely about preserving itself. We are not called as people of God simply to preserve our own lives. That is the good news. That is the gospel that Luther preached. Probably one of the most famous paintings of the Reformation era in Wittenberg is an image from the side view, like the courtyard to here, with Luther preaching from the pulpit, the congregation sitting and listening, and in between, kind of floating in between, is a cross and Christ. And Luther's image is pointing to the cross and Christ. That is what we celebrate on this day. We celebrate that Christ is risen, that we do not need to live lives that are only about preserving our own lives. That yes, we are in fact, because of that, justified by grace through faith. And since we don't need to live every minute trying to justify who we are to every last person that walks past us, we are free to live not then just for ourselves, but for others first. And if we think of all of the angst of this present moment in our world and in our society, in our neighborhoods and our families and our schools and our work, living for others first feels like a powerful antidote. So I would encourage you on this Reformation Day, remember Luther in all of his flaws, all of his courage. Remember that we are justified by grace through faith because Christ is risen today. Amen.